into the horse race. My name is Daniel Vaughn. I'm a columnist at the Conservative Institute for those of you who are new. I also have a newsletter at thebeltwayoutsiders.com, and I'm your host of the show tonight for the horse race, covering everything related to the U.S. elections, polling news, etc., keeping you up to date on the very important news that's driving both the polling and driving the news cycle. You can go to theconservativeinstitute.org where you can go read all of my columns there. The latest one up is about the Democratic Party's impasse, whether or not they're going to kick Joe Biden. That went up on Wednesday. And so tonight we're going to be talking about where the Democratic Party is in that impasse, kind of going beyond that column, talking a little bit about where the leadership in particular of the Democratic Party is. And then after we go through where they are, we're going to cover the polling tonight, which continues to be excellent for Donald Trump. So that's sort of a roadmap of what we're going to cover for the show today. So we're going to jump right in because the news is flying in pretty fast. If you've been trying to follow what's the latest things happening with the Democratic Party, you no doubt know that. But for those of you who are not following quite as closely, the big story breaking this evening is about Senator Chuck Schumer. Axios is reporting tonight that Chuck Schumer is open to dumping Biden in 2024. Axios is reporting specifically that private donors, so here at the top, are open to a Democratic presidential ticket that isn't led by Joe Biden, which is a friendly way of saying they want anybody but Joe Biden at the top. So as Axios notes, if you look at all the public statements, Chuck Schumer has been very insistent that he's for Joe Biden, but over the last 12 days, he's been hearing a lot, specifically from donors and from the rank and file in the Democratic Party. And this report kind of just breaks down all the different people who have talked to him. The big thing, particularly that happened today, is Wednesday kicked off with Nancy Pelosi going on Morning Joe and telling viewers on Morning Joe, specifically one viewer, because Morning Joe is Joe Biden's favorite TV show, telling Joe Biden that she just hopes he makes the right decision. She's not quite as strong publicly as you have seen some of these other previous statements where she's been just throwing her full support behind Joe Biden. This is more of she hopes that he makes the right decision. And so this break here where you're seeing Pelosi soften her stance on what Joe Biden should or shouldn't do is significant. Yesterday and Tuesday, it sort of looked like the White House had sort of won this round of bickering in the Democratic Party. Joe Biden had thrown down a gauntlet, challenged Democrats to challenge him literally at the convention, and basically said there would be mutually assured destruction. Several reporters basically laid out that was the plan, both in Political, Semaphore, and others. They said that the Biden campaign was basically saying if the Democratic Party tried to pull Joe Biden down, he would pull them down with him, which was a pretty shocking statement to see. The aftermath of that has been Democratic leadership trying to draw a line with Joe Biden. And so when this story with Axios came out, a second story almost came out at the same time, which was that Democratic Senator Peter Welch is now stating, and he's in Maine, I believe it is. I mean Vermont. There was some other news coming out of Maine. Out of Vermont, he said that he believes that Biden should withdraw. He wrote a full op-ed in the Washington Post saying that Joe Biden should withdraw. And this came out at the same time that you have Chuck Schumer saying that he's open. So you're seeing these cracks breaking. Up until now, there haven't really been any cracks among the Democratic senators. You heard some early news with Mark Warner in Virginia and some other senators related to him that maybe that they were going to form a pool and talk to Joe Biden. That never materialized. That story leaked, and they proceeded to retreat. And so there was no real meeting that happened there. There have been multiple meetings in the House across all the different caucuses with committee leaders, with leadership, and the rank and file. Those have been just an unmitigated disaster for Democrats. You can go, specifically, you can read Axios. They've been getting all kinds of leaks from Democrats on this. They've had stories of people crying in these meetings, and not for Joe Biden, and just an overall sense of despair when you're looking at the reporting of where the Democratic mind is, specifically in Congress, when you're looking at Joe Biden and the polling. So we have Chuck Schumer saying that he's open. You have Nancy Pelosi pulling her support back today, and you have the first senator, Democratic senator, saying Biden should withdraw. So instead of this issue quieting down for Biden, you're seeing a mushroom cloud. And it started with Nancy Pelosi basically saying that Biden should just do the best thing possible. And you, in the New York Times and others kind of noted, there's this odd line that Democrats have been talking about. Um, Basically, it's summed up is that your final answer? And they're asking Biden to reconsider what he's said. And if you look at some of the statements that they're making, she says, he's beloved, he is respected. People want him to make that decision, not me. I want him to do whatever he decides to do, and that's the way it is. And that's a really weird phrase. Remember, on Monday, the White House came out with a letter, and in that letter, they told everyone in Congress, Joe Biden's in this to witness, he's not dropping out. He went on Morning Joe Biden did, and he declared the same thing, that he's in it to win it, and he's not stepping away. And so you have these very clear, very declarative statements from the White House that Biden is not going to step aside. And the conclusion that the New York Times has from reading all of these statements, Democrats are asking, is this your final answer? So my view of this up until now is that Democrats have been in a soft pressure campaign in order to try to get Joe Biden out of the race. The impasse is that now, in order to get him out, because he's declared this so strongly and staunchly that he's not getting out, Democrats have to decide whether or not they're going to ratchet it up and go a much harsher route. And that would include things like challenging him at the convention and other things. And this is sort of the last stop here. When you're asking, is that your final answer? You're begging Biden at this stage to do anything but continue to run. And this is now becoming clear. This is the view of Nancy Pelosi. It's the view of Chuck Schumer. If it's the view of those two, you can bet it's the same view for Hakeem Jeffries, the speaker, or not Speaker of House, the House Minority Leader. And so you have the Democratic leadership basically co-rallying this message. They're giving Biden one more chance here to try to step away, to withdraw out of this race. Are they going to do anything after that? Well, that's unclear. So on Thursday, it's another D-Day moment for Joe Biden. There, he's coming towards the end of NATO week for him, and there's a press conference scheduled at the end of this event. And Biden is expected to be before reporters and take questions in an unscripted manner. Now, unscripted, we don't know what that means now because Joe Biden, well, his campaign was keep trying to get reporters questions and have, Biden ready to answer in a stock fashion. That's how you got the radio station people fired in Philadelphia, who, they said that, they had to pick from a list of questions for the White House. Well, the White House said after that they were not going to be doing the same thing that they were doing before. And with all the fallout from Democrats, this is one of the first time. This is the first time, really, that Joe Biden is going to be before a group of reporters and have questions shot back at him. That's not going to be a safe venue for him. And the White House has very specifically tried to hide Biden from those types of situations. So as we get towards the end of this event, tomorrow for Thursday, is that going to be a safe venue for Joe Biden? How are these reporters going to go after him? They're probably going to go pretty hard after him. And that is leading us into the next thing, which is the campaign is taking a major fundraising hit right now. What you're seeing is that you're seeing donors pull out from the Biden campaign. And while we don't have any official numbers, the Biden campaign came out immediately after the debate and said they had raised but somewhere between $30 to $40 million in the immediate aftermath of the debate. That's all great. The problem is that's not continued. Donors, and a good example of this is George Clooney's op-ed in the New York Times on Wednesday saying, we need a new candidate. What you're seeing is that the donor class is pulling away from Biden and putting their resources in down ballot races. So if you're a Democrat and you don't believe Biden can win, and that is right now is the majority consensus view of every Democrat in Congress and the donor class among Democrats, they do not believe Joe Biden can win. You are now pulling your resources away from Biden and putting it in down ballot races. So you have these quotes here in NBC News where the Biden campaign is describing their funding situation as disastrous and that the money has completely shut off. On the record, you'll find, the Biden campaign will rebut this and say that that's not true. But you're seeing these other stories here where donors are negative. People who are most die hard for him, they're pulling out their money. You're also seeing other things where fundraiser events are getting canceled. So events in Chicago, Texas, and Wisconsin, things where the Biden campaign should have been able to go in and just do a quick event and get a lot of money, those events are drying up. Now, the reason that this is important, it's not, all campaigns obviously need money to run. But right now, Joe Biden's campaign is burning a lot of money. They are running a lot of ads right now trying to attack Donald Trump and shift the story on him. The problem, obviously, is that the media coverage is so negative for Biden that these ads aren't making a dent. And when we go and look at the polls, you're going to see Biden's at the lowest point that he's been in these polls. And so when you're spending all this money and getting nowhere, you're draining your coffers. And so right now, the Biden campaign has a very disastrous situation on his hands where they are running out of money, they're burning it quick, and their donors are not turning around and coming back to support them. So between Democratic leadership saying that they are thinking about taking a different route, and the donor class of the Democratic Party saying the same thing, and you could read this as them voting with their money and their feet. They're walking out and pulling their money, and when that starts happening, so that tells you the real story behind it. Because if you're a person running for office, you need money, and if these people are just taking their chips and going home, you've got to find a way to pull them back in. And so this is becoming a desperate situation if you're a down ballot Democrat. If you're in a tough Senate race or a really tight House race, you need that money coming in. And if Biden becomes dead weight, your hill to climb is much higher. So this is becoming a very dangerous situation for down ballot Democrats. They've got to figure out a way to dig their way out of it. They're all looking at this big press conference coming up on Thursday. Additionally, the Biden campaign has put up another sit down interview scheduled with NBC News on Monday and Lester Holt. We'll see if that eventually comes to pass. Because right now, the Biden campaign is taking on water on all sides. They thought they had everything nailed down on Tuesday, and now things have ballooned out of control. Whether or not they can get back to control remains to be seen. Biden obviously has the delegates and he has the presidency, so he's the one who has to make the decision ultimately. But Democrats are becoming more and more desperate to try to push him out of the race because it's becoming clearer and clearer that he is going to lose. So that's sort of the broad picture of where we are and with whether or not Biden is going to be in this race. It's looking a little more dire for him right now. And even if he manages to survive this, he's going to be supremely wounded by this process because you have the entire media establishment, particularly on the left with the New York Times, Washington Post, and others, all coming out and saying Biden should withdraw. And you have Democratic Party leadership basically voting now and saying they don't have confidence that Biden can continue. And with stories like this one here in NBC News, you've got the donor class voting as well by saying we're not going to give you money because we don't think you can win, and we don't think you're a viable candidate at this stage. So you can't say that the dam is broken for Biden, but there are leaks in a lot of different places, and they're going to have to figure out a way to square this circle here of where they get their money and how they're going to continue pushing forward. Because right now they're running low on cash and burning through their coffers. Before about 4 or 5 months ago, Biden had a lot of cash and Trump was the one fighting. Those fortunes have reversed. Now you've got Trump with the pile of cash, and he doesn't really have to worry about anything. Trump doesn't have to run any ads right now, and he's not because he's ahead in the polls. And so you're seeing, Biden's large amount of cash, Trump's large amount of cash get pushed further into the election. So as we get into September, October, November, Trump's going to be able to unleash a lot more resources than the Biden campaign because right now Biden is preoccupied with just surviving. And the more money that's taken away from the Biden campaign, the better it is long term for the Trump campaign. So that's sort of the broad picture of where things sit right now. We're going to jump now into the polls because that's an even worse picture for Joe Biden. So, as always, we're going to jump over here to the Real Clear Politics Average. You look over here and all the latest polls, that's a lot of red. You got a lot of red over here. Right now, Trump is leading by 3.3 points. The irony of is that if you get more of these, Emerson polls where Trump is leading by 3 points, which is a fantastic poll, by the way, it actually brings down his overall average. That's how commanding Trump's lead is right now. You still have the two 6 point leads here from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. You also still have the CNN poll here, which has Trump up by 6. So there's a lot of, you know, pro-Trump polls in here. Biden's best poll is a Reuters Ipsos poll here, where it shows the race at a tie. I would note here, though, both of these show both Trump and Biden at 40%. So that leads, that equals 80%. So that means, according to Reuters, there's 20% undecided in these polls. Because remember, this is a two-way race. This is the five-way. So these aren't going to other people. This is 20% in Reuters saying that they are undecided in this race. In the rest of these polls, there's far fewer of those. You see people clearly marching towards Trump. So the absolute best case for Joe Biden right now is that it's 40-40 with 20% of people undecided. And right now, there's not a single poll showing the undecideds jumping towards Joe Biden. As we get closer to the race, we're going to see more of these polls try to figure out what the undecideds are thinking. But right now, you'd be hard pressed to find a single instance where Joe Biden has a positive poll. The other thing to note here, it's July 10th when I'm recording this. These won't be much different on July 11th if you're watching it tomorrow. At this point in 2020, Biden was leading by 9 points. At this point in 2016, Clinton was leading by 4.5. So if you just add Trump's poll number to that, you're looking at a 12 plus point swing towards Donald Trump between where we were in 2020 and now. That is a seismic shift. Clinton and Trump are much closer, but you're talking about a close to 8 point swing from where Clinton was to Donald Trump. You're looking obviously right now at the largest spread between Trump and Biden. This is one of those exogenous events that when it hits, it hammers the campaign race and scrambles up the polls. But it is having an outsized impact in showing that Biden is having a very hard point in treading water. I'm going to drop down here and look at the chart here because I found this interesting. So this is the last 6 months. You can look at the last 2 years and you can see over time they're both kind of trending up. But if you look at the last 6 months here, so basically from January to now, you can see, this is obviously one of the widest spreads that we have here, 3.3. You have Biden at his lowest point and Trump near one of his high points. You see him peaking at over 47% here, 4 different separate time points here. So this is Trump near one of his peaks, and Biden is near one of the lowest points. His lowest point was back in February when he hit 43%. There are polls showing him at 43% up there, but in the overall averages, he hasn't hit that. But you do see a very clear decline for Biden, and he's really trended down ever since the end of May, which is ironic because that's when we got the news reports of Trump's conviction. So, and that's what I want to note in this poll here. You see the polls converge here at 2 distinct points. So this one right here is the State of the Union moment for Joe Biden. You see the polls crunch down and get real close. Trump never gives up his lead in these polls, but the averages do close up. And then once all that washes out of the news cycle, and we move on from the State of the Union, and we're moving on to other news stories, you see a very rapid climb back up for Biden, and his polls trend back towards 47%. Biden's polls always tend to try to track Trump's before they collapse again, so he can never hold any of these peaks here. Whenever Biden approaches 47%, you see him collapse pretty quickly, so he can never hold that. The second point here is when you get into the conviction. So the conviction, Donald Trump's conviction, hits here at the end of May. You see a drop for both of them, and things narrow up. But once that gets washed out of the cycle, you see an explosion back for Trump when he climbs back to 47%. And what's different, obviously from these other points, this is the debate. And so this is Joe Biden's negative news cycle, and you see a very clear divergence. So people are dropping away from Biden. In both of these other situations here, you saw the race tighten up with Trump recovering and Biden sinking back down. This is one of those news cycles that does not benefit Joe Biden, and you're seeing Trump climb. So Trump is holding his high, and Joe Biden is sinking. If this was a negative news cycle for Donald Trump, you would probably see the opposite. You see one of these things where race tightens up and then Trump recovers. But with Biden, it's the opposite. You see Trump climb and Biden falls. So you see this really big widening gap in the spread here of the polls. So the real question we have moving forward is, does this hold? You would expect, this news cycle with whether or not Biden's going to be replaced, is been here for a while, and depending on how long that lasts, that could keep Biden's numbers artificially low for a while. You would expect him to be able to recover back up to at least to this 45% line, because that's kind of, if you averaged all this out and kind of looked at it over the last 6 months, you would see him in and around this 45% line. And the question is, can he recover there? So far, Biden has not shown a strong ability to recover in the polls. You saw him sort of bounce back at the beginning of the year and work his way up, sort of a crescendo here moment here at State of the Union, and then it drops off after that. And again at the conviction. But right now, he's lost all of the momentum that he'd built up over the early part of the year. So can Biden at least bring it back to an equilibrium of around 45? A high point for him would be hitting 46%. And then the question is, how long can Trump maintain this 47% range? His natural range here, particularly if you look back at the spring and some of these spots in the winter, his numbers want to go back to this 47% range. So he's wanting to show a commanding lead. And if this continues here, I think you're going to start to see some of this get baked in, where the undecided start shifting closer and closer to Trump and away from Joe Biden. So the polling here is really bad for Biden. There's really no other way to put it. If you jump into the battleground states, it's an even worse story. You see, overall, Trump has a commanding 4-point lead, so it's even larger than the national lead. And he's got an outsized lead, and now in all of them. For a while, Wisconsin was the tied race. Now we're seeing Michigan being more of the tight race, and with Trump having a lead in Wisconsin. And then the key race for me, I think the tipping point state is going to end up being Pennsylvania. One of the first things I said when I started running the horse race is that we didn't have a lot of polling in Pennsylvania. That is no longer true. We now have polling in Pennsylvania, and it is pretty bad for Biden. Bloomberg, the Morning Consult ran a poll. They showed Trump leading by 7 points. Emerson has him at a 5-point lead. If you read the Cook Political Report, which is one of the older journals that covers elections on a cycle basis in America, they claimed that they had seen some internal polls on the Democratic side that had Donald Trump leading Pennsylvania by as many as 10 points. A 10-point lead in Pennsylvania is earthquake level for everyone. If Donald Trump has a 10-point lead in Pennsylvania, you're looking at a wipeout territory across the union. There's even been some internal pollings that shows Biden only has a single-digit lead in places like New York. So in these deep blue states, you're seeing Biden really get hammered. Now, do I think that's going to, be there long term? No, not really. This is all going to be decided by these states here, and they're going to be whether or not you see Trump have a landslide or not. This is still what it's going to be coming down to. So I wouldn't expect Republicans to dump money in places like California and New York to, just to get in some of those cheap votes. That's not going to happen. But you are seeing everything matter here. So Trump's 3-point lead is translating to a 4-point lead across the battleground states. So Republicans have a little bit better edge in these swing states, and that is boosting Trump even more. So Biden is in bad shape in every last single place. So if Trump could very well sweep all these. Right now, places like Arizona and Nevada are not even looking like they're going to be a contested race for Trump. And if that's true, if he sweeps Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, then he really is going to have to nail one of these. He's only going to need one of these, Northwest states. Biden's goal here is increasingly his only path forward is to win a 270 to 268 electoral college race, and that's where he gives up Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and then has to sweep Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin here. And if you're talking a 10-point lead for Trump, if Trump actually wins Pennsylvania by 10 points, you're looking at possibly even Minnesota flipping for Trump. That's how that translates into some of these Midwestern states. I don't necessarily think Trump has a 10-point lead. That would be just otherworldly. But based on the average of some of these other things we're seeing, a 4 to 5-point lead is not out of the question right now. And so Trump needs that to translate more things long term, and he needs to be able to maintain that. So that's where we are in the battleground states. We'll bounce back here and look real quick and walk through the 5-way split. So this is the ones that includes, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Jill Stein, and Cornel West. If you look at this, Trump's overall lead is sitting at 5 points. He's holding a pretty commanding point here. If you include the 5-way, you're seeing Trump hold a pretty steady lead here, and there's not been much movement here. Let's back it down to 3 months. What you can see here is that Biden's lead has shrunk down here, which you would expect, and you see Kennedy bouncing back up. So a lot of these people who are now undecided on Biden because of his age and health issues are now bouncing towards Kennedy. So that is, again, really bad news if you're Joe Biden, because this is what the ballot's going to look like. You're going to have these long list of people here, and if Trump has a 5 point lead here, again, you're looking at wipeout territory for Democrats. And so this is why they are talking in such drastic terms. They are at a place where they're looking at having to save the House and the Senate instead of having to try to win the presidency, because this is not something that they can withstand long term. Last thing here I want to focus in on is the betting odds, and the only reason I want to do that is just to show you how, back in May, this was a tight race. You hit the conviction of Donald Trump, things explode back up, and you've seen Biden lose, just absolutely fall off the side of a cliff. Right now, he regained his lead for a while there. Kamala Harris actually had better betting odds than Joe Biden to actually be the president. Right now, she and Biden are basically tied. Biden has 14.7 and Harris has 14.3% odds, while Donald Trump is up here. And what I would want you to note here is note that general trend line in the betting markets. Donald Trump is gaining ground. This is the stark drop off here for Biden is noteworthy, but in reality, you're seeing Trump climb closer and closer to 60% odds in the betting markets. So everything, every possible data point that you could have for Joe Biden and Democrats right now is bad. The only positive that Democrats have right now is that if you go state by state and looking at a lot of these individual Senate and House races, you can find Democratic candidates outpolling Joe Biden. And so if that is something that holds through election day, you could see, Donald Trump win and Democrats overperform Joe Biden's numbers and at least keep the House and Senate close. But otherwise, you would expect Republicans to take the Senate because they've got an easy race in West Virginia. They're likely going to take Montana. And so that just gives them +2 already on the nose walking into election day. And so if that continues, you're looking at Republican control of the Senate. And depending on how the House goes, you're probably looking at a tight number in the House as well for Republicans. So Donald Trump could very well go into January. He'll be tight, but he could very well control, have the trifecta. You have the presidency, the Senate, and the House. And if these numbers here hold in the polling, we're going to go back here real quick to the Trump versus Biden numbers. If these numbers hold here and you're looking at Donald Trump at a 3 point lead, Donald Trump's going to win the popular vote too. That is something that is not outside the realm of possibility. And he would be the first Republican president to do that since George W. Bush in 2004. So this is where we are. You have Donald Trump in a commanding lead in these polls, and he is not only very likely to win, he's very likely to take the popular vote. And right now, he's on track to achieve a landslide victory in the Electoral College. And that's why you're seeing all of the scrambling from Democrats, because they do not have a single positive data point to point to say, oh, yeah, Joe Biden should be our guy because he's the one who can get us through this. There's no data point that you can point to say that Biden's going to get them through this. So until you see Democrats either give up and just resign themselves to Biden, you're going to continue to see this push because Democrats don't believe they can win with Joe Biden. So keep watching, for these press conferences and everything else, because it's going to get real interesting. Because if Biden has one slip up, you're going to see these polling numbers get worse and Democrats get even more panicky. So that's all I've got for you today. Make sure to tune in to the next episode and make sure to like and subscribe so that you can get more of these each coming week. Thanks, guys.